You forgot the first rule of remakes, Jill. Don't fuck with the original.
Hey everybody, welcome to Don't F with the Original.
I am here with...
Oh, sorry about that. Yannis. I'm a subtitle editor, sometimes cocktail enthusiast.
I'm Eric. I'm a teacher, sometimes writer.
And Chris, occasional writer and subtitling editor with Yannis.
And I'm Francois, cyber librarian, and like the giant turtle of the Godzilla movies, I am friend to all children.
And I am Dimitri, editor-in-chief of Idiomatic.com and movie critic.
Hi everyone. This week we're going to review Wes Craven's Nightmare on Elm Street.
That's the original, not the remake that's coming right as we're releasing this.
To recap, Nightmare on Elm Street is a film about a child killer / serial killer named Freddy Krueger, played by Robert Englund, who plagues the dreams of 4 or 5 high school students in a small town USA. And the heroine of the film, Heather Langenkamp, who plays Nancy Thompson, eventually figures out a way to defeat Freddy Krueger.
Or does she?
Can I jump in here? Because I remember watching it. Like, what year did this come? Like, I watched this. It must have been 1988 or something like that.
No, 1984.
Really? Okay, so I enjoyed watching it, and I think it taps into it. I guess a lot of the horror movies at the time. I guess for me, it was all teenagers, preteens watching them. And everyone at that time starts reading, astrology books and dream books and all these things. And so it's a ready-made mythology that they started playing with, so it sucked you in. The character is so engaging. And then it's just basically you've got like a series of chapters that goes from like teen to teen to teen, and so it tells well and rather almost like an episodic story, or like Creepshow or something,
Yeah, I didn't quite... I always felt that the Nightmare on Elm Street, the first one in the franchise, really had... maybe a darker edge to them, something that I couldn't quite dismiss as much as an axe-wielding giant with a hockey mask.
Yeah, what I think works well with Nightmare, and Chris touched on it a little bit, is the mythology. I mean, it is the classic tale of the boogeyman, set in an urban environment, small-town USA. And, I think it touches on a lot of what kids are afraid of at night when they go to bed. The boogeyman in the closet, what's hiding under the bed, classic sort of monster tale. I mean, I remember watching it when I was 8 or 9 years old, and I used to watch it with eyes closed, and I would flip back and forth between, like, whatever was on another channel, because I was just absolutely terrified. And I think a lot of that terror, in addition to, classic horror movie photography, it is because of Robert Englund's portrayal of Freddy Krueger.
Absolutely. And one of the things also I love about it, though, is that they take all those scary elements and they make a statement with it. They don't just scare you. The whole idea with, like, those who've listened to this podcast for a while or been on the site for a while know that I absolutely adore horror films. And one of the reasons I do is because they're like fables. They're the closest thing we have to modern-day fables, cautionary tales and whatnot. And that's because they are allowed to have a monster that you don't have to humanize in any way. And in the case of the Freddy series, in the case of A Nightmare on Elm Street specifically, I love the message, the whole idea of if you live your life in denial or asleep, you're going to fail, you're going to die. And if you face your problems, if you face whatever is terrifying you, that's where your chance of survival is. And the movie is really sticks to that idea. You have alcoholism at some point, and again, alcoholism is a way of escaping your problems, so you can guess what the fate of that character is going to be. Overprotection in terms of parents, like burying your head in the sand, or denial of who your boyfriend really is. Everybody who's in denial pays for it in one way or the other, and it's only the people who go like, oh, wait a minute, what I'm doing doesn't work and I need to change my life. Those are the people who make it at the end of the movie. And that, for me, is like, if a horror movie can make a statement like that, then, well, you're better than already 2/3 of them,
So if that's the cautionary tale for Freddy, what's the cautionary tale for Friday the 13th? Don't go skinny dipping
No, it's all about promiscuity bad.
Yeah.
Because the whole idea of Freddy is Jason Voorhees drowned because the camp counselors were fornicating while they should have watched him.
That's right.
And so they end up paying for it, or every camp counselor who fornicates from that point on ends up paying for it. And I think what makes Nightmare on Elm Street better on that level is that the cautionary tale works not just as you did something bad, you pay for it, but the characters are actually in control of their fate to a certain degree, which is rare in horror films.
There is an interesting thing about the Nightmare on Elm Street series. Yannis is right to point out that Robert Englund does a great job, but I have to mention what, for me, and for I guess a lot of people, the wardrobe. To me, Nightmare on Elm Street boils down to three things: the shirt, the hat, and the claws. The claws, man. Seriously, like that was something unsettling. Something of a really just, I guess, I don't know, a clever,
the
wicked...
deformity also of his face.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just the stripy shirt and everything
exactly.
else. And I'm like, yeah, I agree.
But that glove, to me, really just, I remember being like just, fairly freaked out by that.
Yeah.
It was a fairly inventive and twisted take on
And then everybody would dress that way at Halloween.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, actually.
Yeah,
I remember that. It was
It's a fresh take on the slasher film. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so instead of the traditional kitchen knife or cleaver, here you have something that's more of a killing machine and much more mobile and useful in a glove with knives. It's really, really clever.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting point because I think Nightmare on Elm Street did revolutionize the slasher at the time, where it was always serial killer, and here they introduced the element of the fantastic, and I think it was the first time it was introduced to the slasher genre specifically, not to the horror genre, but to the slasher genre, and it allowed them to do something different. Where we mentioned Friday the 13th and also Halloween and most of those killers are all about the unstoppable. You can't stop Jason. You can stab him, you can do anything. He's stronger than you. He can go through walls. The same thing with Michael Myers from Halloween. And Freddy actually gets beat up quite a few times during the movie. But the thing is that he's inescapable. You need to sleep eventually. You can't escape him, and it's a different angle of it. And that's another element that I think makes it so fresh.
Yeah. They played up on the aspect also of, are you really asleep, are you awake? I really like that as the movies evolved, there is that bit where, you try to stay awake, and all of a sudden you don't realize that you've fallen asleep. That was an interesting take.
That's a really good point that you make, because I watched the film recently, and Wes Craven did an excellent job of confusing the audience member with the transitions between the awake state of the characters and the sleep state. There were some instances where you weren't quite sure, where are we? And then you would see Freddy show up, and then that would be your cue that, oh, wow, they fell asleep, but I must have missed that somehow. And that sort of seamless transition made the film work really well.
One of the great ways he does it, he doesn't do it through obvious camera movements. Often it's like when you're in dream world, the camera's crooked, and I hate that because I've never had a dream where my point of view was crooked. And Wes Craven, what he does with it is so clever because he starts chopping moments in the narrative. Like somebody will exit a room and will get to the kitchen, and we understand what's going on. And it's only when you realize that it's a dream that you realize, oh wait, that is how a dream works. Where you go into one room and you get to the other end of because you skip the stairs.
Yeah.
And it was a really clever hints like that are more narrative related than visually related. It's nice.
Yannis, as you mentioned, the new movie is going to be coming out pretty soon.
Can it possibly live up to the original?
Well, I had a question for two fans, Dimitri, Yannis. You mentioned the morality element. Like if we were going to take the story, bring it to now, none of us at this point know what the movie's about. What do you think is, I guess, the sin that would be worthy of punishment? Or is it just going to be a straight out, slash thing?
I'd say abusing your constitutional powers.
It's going to be a teabag thing.
Yeah, maybe.
I mean, I don't know if they can address this in the film, but certainly something that you see nowadays is I guess, the for lack of a better word, orgy of opulence that exists in society, right? Where
Sexting.
Yeah, where everything becomes sexitized, if you will. Like, the money you make, the products you buy, the life you live, and the decadence that comes as a consequence, and that sort of morality there. I don't know if they can address that in a nightmare film, but going back to the original, they did address that urban versus suburban myth, right? That that everything is really picturesque in suburbs as opposed to the city, which of course we all know is not true. So maybe they can take a new perspective on that approach.
Yeah, I would love them to actually tackle the whole idea of relativism as a form of escaping responsibility. It's sort of like, if everybody has a point of view, then I'm never wrong. Because just from the trailer, you see Freddy before he gets burned, going like, "What are you doing to me?" And it would be a great idea if a lot of the characters were like that, where he's a child killer or molester in this version. I have no idea, but at least a killer, and he'd be like refusing to really take responsibility for his actions, and have that as a theme would really be a nice update of what was done in the original.
I think it should be somebody that's that they all watch Star Trek, the new movie, and they say like William Shatner, it was the better Kirk.
And that's what drives him crazy.
Why is everyone looking at me?
I give it an A. I think I was this close from giving it an A+, but like, come on, it's let's not push it. But it's how these movies should be made. It's a movie that influenced all the other slashers that were made after it, and quite frankly, it's the models that these movies should follow. I don't have any problem with the fact that movies go like, let's see what made Nightmare work and copy it, because that's the formula that works. That's the formula that scares you, thrills you, and actually manages to communicate something to you, and not just be this kind of vapid, nihilistic thrill ride,
I'll give it an A as well. I think you make very good points, and if we're talking about a movie 26 years down the line, there's a good chance it's an A.
Yeah, I'll give it an A as well. I have some minor issues with the film. Ronnie Berkeley's portrayal of the mother, I find was really kind of, exaggerated, if you will, with the difficulties with the alcoholism. And frankly, I thought that was a little too much. But before the show, you mentioned that particular actress had difficulty with alcoholism on the set.
Yeah.
So, of course, that would explain it. The other issue that I had with the film was just the end of the film, with how all by her lonesome Heather Langenkamp is able to devise all these machinations to trap Freddy. That I find a little bit unrealistic, but I understand why it was done that way. But I mean, other than those minor details, I think the film is an instant classic, and like you said, it's going to be, the benchmark by which all other films would be measured.
For me, it's been years since I've watched it. Just talking about it now makes me want to go revisit it. But I really enjoyed watching it, and it's one of the ones that just stayed with you despite the other movies you watch. So, I can't go as high as A, because that would mean I've probably wanted to go back and watch it since, and I haven't. I'll admit that freely. But I do think it was a B+. It was a solid movie, and I enjoyed it a lot at the time.
Yeah, I'd give it a B+ too. I mean, I'm not a big fan of horror films, but every time it would pass on like night TV and stuff like that, I would watch it. And you're right, I did enjoy it, and especially what's his name there?
Robert Englund.
Robert Englund. Yeah, I love that guy. I think he plays a great character, very funny, and just great. Creepy too.
There was another pretty famous character in the 80s who had one glove, wore a hat, and later got blamed for child molestation.
His face also got burned.
His face was actually burnt, and I'm just wondering if there's a parallel, or if anyone's ever discussed it, or is it prescient?
Dude, too soon.
So what do you think of the fact that Nightmare on Elm Street is being remade now? I'll throw this one over to Yannis.
I think I'm hesitant, but that's because I generally don't like remakes, because I think normally what just ends up happening is they try to imitate the original, and then of course everything falls short. Having said that, I recently saw an interview with the lead actor whose name escapes me.
Jackie Earle Haley.
Thank you, Dimitri. And he fully admits that it's exceptionally difficult to fill the shoes of Robert Englund, who, of course, has been playing Freddy Krueger for the entire series, but is also an excellent character actor. And I think, unlike other slasher killers, he admits that it's going to be more difficult to do so, because Robert Englund really brings life to the character of Freddy Krueger. So I think that going into this film, they're aware of having to live up to the tradition. At the same time, I think from what I've seen, the makeup is slightly different and the perspective is slightly different. They're trying to do an origin story, which, again, I'm hesitant about, given Texas Chainsaw remakes. But I'm hopeful.
It's great that you mentioned Jackie Earle Haley because he's actually one of the reasons why I have a lot of hope for this. Because I think he's the perfect actor in this generation to play Freddy Krueger. Freddy Krueger has three aspects to him. First, he's sadistic. Well, that every killer has that. He's a funny man. He's a cruel, funny man, which demands somebody with comic timing. And if you've seen Jackie Earle Haley in Human Target, you know that he does have that comic timing. And there's also that question of balancing that with a certain degree of patheticness. Robin Englund played Freddy Krueger as a powerful, small man. He always played Freddy Krueger as this small, pathetic, evil man who was suddenly given more power than he should ever have. And I think Jackie Earle Haley, if you again watch Watchmen this time, you can see that he's totally the kind of guy who can convey that.
I think you can take a really good story and you can hang a bunch of new actors onto it, and that's fine. But I guess if the question here is, what do you think about the fact that it's being remade? I guess I'm going to kind of reel it back for a second. I'm not really excited about any remakes. I find right now is the time to do it. We can throw in the budget. We can throw the special effects. You've got a ready-made audience. When it's harder to bring in or justify a tentpole movie, it makes sense. This is why we've got the comic book movies. This is why we're doing a remake of Star Trek. You've got an assured opening box office, But I don't know. I'm not going to say that I'm excited to see a rehash of things from 26 years ago. I'm a little bit, I'm kind of tired. I feel, I'm just like, it's nice, it's good, but it's just like, how many horror movies are we going to have to remake?
Well, I think the thing with horror movies, though, is where it's different from other types of movies because of the question of sequelization. A sequel to an action movie has to continue the story to a certain degree or bring a new adventure to it and whatnot. Horror films have always been peculiar in their sequels in the sense that they tend to be rehashes of the same idea, variations on the same theme. And the good sequels are the ones that bring a nice variation on the common theme and bring something new to it. So in a way, all 7 sequels of Nightmare on Elm Street could almost be considered remakes in and of themselves. You know what I mean?
Okay, I see what you're saying.
And the fact of the matter is, the series jumped the shark sometime between the fiery dog pea that revived Freddy in the 4th movie and the Freddy playing Nintendo to kill a kid in the 6th one. And so I'm kind of looking forward to them just starting from scratch so that they don't have to carry that really ugly baggage behind them and just give us some new variations on this theme that I like.
But isn't that symptomatic of horror movies in general, right? Like, I think that there's a certain disdain for the audience. Once they get a hit, like, all of a sudden they figure, okay, well, all we have to do is rewrite the original, and people will still flock to it because they're horror fans, they're unsophisticated, they're young teenagers, they don't care for story. To me, it's an insult, absolutely, to the audience, but I think that that's symptomatic of the industry to a certain extent, particularly in the horror genre.
See, I don't see it as an insult. I don't think the sequels being a rehash of the original film is necessarily a bad thing. It's using the same tropes to convey a different fable. In the case of Nightmare on Elm Street, like, what's interesting is the first one, it's all about facing your problems. The second one was kind of fun, is it's all about facing your sexuality. And because they inadvertently hired a gay actor to portray that, he ended up playing a character who's facing his homosexuality, which makes the movie even more valuable than it was originally scripted to be. And the third one and the fourth one all deal with facing something else in your life. So it's not like they're completely redundant. They're just using the same tropes to communicate a different message. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing,
Well, as for me, I don't really like remakes. Most of the time I'm like, well, if the movie was good, why would you remake it?
Well, that's exactly why you would remake it.
No, I get the whole point of the industry, but at the same time, like, as a moviegoer, it's like, the whole thing with Psycho. Seeing the one with Vince Vaughn, I'm like, well, this is stupid. The first one was so much better.
It's practically a frame by frame.
Exactly. But most of the time, I would like them to make remakes of the movies that had good premise, that had a good idea, but for some reason failed.
Well, they did. They just remade The Crazies recently. George Romero's Crazies had a great concept, but he kind of failed on the execution, and they remade it. And they made a good movie out of it.
Yeah.
I think what works well with horror remakes is that they're evergreen. A horror story taps into the human psyche, and these fears that we have that are portrayed on screen never really go away. And so as long as the repackaging is fresh, like a new perspective on the same thing, I think horror can always do that kind of thing, because those fears that we're experiencing in the theater never really go away. And it's our curiosity about those fears that make us go and see these films. So when I heard about it, I was a little nervous, and I still am. But I think, here's another great opportunity to reinvent a series for a newer generation of horror goer that may not necessarily go back to the '84 release and watch it just because of its production values. And I think we have to keep that in mind as well.
Absolutely, and not just production values. The thing with horror is that for it to be scary, you have to be able to relate to it.
That's right.
And somebody who was born in 1989 is not going to relate to a 1984 teenager. Mm-hmm. And so, that's another reason why a remake might be in order.
That's a good point.
I'll finish it. I'll finish off the question by offering my own thoughts, which will echo those of Chris and Eric. It's interesting. I'm in a generation where I recall the rise of the remake, but back then to me it was exciting because I hadn't seen the originals. Like, I remember, for example, The Fugitive, which I'd never seen on television because it was in the 60s.
And you couldn't buy the VHS at the time. Whereas now, we have had the chance to actually see the originals. So
absolutely. But now I find that more and more, now what's being remade is the stuff that I grew up with, and all of a sudden I'm very protective of the stuff that I used to watch. And so I tend to be very, very hesitant and ambivalent about hearing about this. Oh, well, okay, they're remaking this and they're remaking that. In the case of Transformers and G.I. Joes, I'm like, they're Saturday morning cartoons, guys. It's really, do we want to spend $200 million on that? But we'll see where it takes us. I'll probably go see it.
I had a quick question. It's not quite, it's off topic for a second, but you said horror goers, and I was just kind of curious, I like to watch a comedy in the theater. For me, that's very participatory. Horror movies, when I watch them, it's generally something done at home with a group of friends. Whereas a drama I can watch by myself. And I'm just curious, what's your best venue for a horror movie? Is it in the theater, or does it need to be in the theater?
All the way for me, yeah.
All the way, absolutely.
Right.
I think, like all movies, and we can talk about this on another show, the movie-going experience is a communal experience. And regardless of the genre, comedy is a really good example, and I guess the polar opposite of that would be a horror film. It's the same sort of thing. You're in a dark room, with strangers. You're not sure how everyone's going to react, but it's those moments where you share in absolute terror, and then all of a sudden everybody breaks out in laughter because they realize that what they've just reacted to is absolutely ridiculous.
Oh, yeah.
No, but that sounded so dirty the way you said it. You're in a dark room with strangers, not sure how they're going to react.
No, but I have a story about that. I saw the movie Ju-On at the Montreal Fantasia Fest. It was the premiere in North America for it. And I was sitting next to this goth girl, bulky, tough looking. She was looking around while people were entering the theater and commenting on what is he doing here? It's she was a pro at horror films, you know what I mean, And the movie started, and halfway through the movie, she grabbed my hand and squeezed really hard. And it was kind of cool because it's sort of there's nothing more fun when you're watching a scary horror film than to have a complete stranger be just as scared as you are. It's a connection there. Yeah. Okay, she took it a step further afterwards because then she started smelling like urine. But
so
at first
this release you were talking about.
Exactly.
Well, we'll have to revisit that at a future podcast.
I just want one last point on that about going to the theater and not necessarily when the lights are up, noticing who's sitting next to you. But what's interesting about the movie-going experience for me is that when the lights go down and you have this assembly of people, they could be from totally different walks of life from your own, and totally different interests and totally different cultures. But what's interesting is what's bringing everyone together is what's on the screen in front of you. And so, Dimitri might not have, gone for a beer with the goth girl, but somehow that masterpiece in front of them is what's brought them together. And I think that speaks to, again, the wonder of cinema. But it can happen in any genre. It doesn't have to be in the classic genres that, the majority of people see.
So
good point, Dimitri.
What?
Good point, Yannis.
Yes.
Well, yes. Too much beer for Francois. You were going to say something, Chris?
No.
He was just
No, he's going to make a bad joke, but I'll take it back.
Okay, it's all right.
Until they come out with a new Police Academy movie, I'm not excited about the new Nightmare on Elm Street.
All right, Dimitri.
Managed to make your bad joke regardless.
Oh, that was the good one.
If you have any questions, comments you want to share with us, write us at mail@idiomanic.com or post a comment at idiomanic.com. We're also on Facebook. We're also on Twitter. And we will see you next time.